Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Pratham Voices from the Ground. I am Devyani Pershad, and I head international collaborations at Pratham, and I'm going to be your host today. I've been with Pratham for over 7 years now, almost 8 years, and I'm proud to be part of such an innovative and exciting organization. And these are very interesting times for everyone, so I'm excited to be with all of you to talk about a very interesting happening in India these days. Thank you to all of you for tuning in today. Do comment and tell us where you're watching from. I'm in Delhi, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest today. We have on our show Samyukta Subramanian, Program Head at Pratham, Annette Francis, who leads data and technology for our vocational training program. We will also be joined by our CEO, Dr. Rukmini Banerji. Rukmini and Samyukta are joining us from Delhi, and Annette is joining us from Mumbai. Please do share this video and tag your friends. As you all know, today's topic is the new National Education Policy, or NEP, which is the first education policy to be introduced in India since 1986. We'll get to hear from our guests about the implications of this policy on India and on our work at Pratham. Do post your questions and comments for our guests as well. So let's begin today. I'd like to welcome our first guest, Samyukta.
Hi Devyani. Hi everyone.
Hi, Samyukta. Welcome. Nice to see you today. So, Samyukta, I know we speak a lot, and many people in the audience might already know you. But just for those of our audience who are meeting you for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about what you do at Pratham?
Sure. Hi. So Devyani, as you mentioned, my name is Samyukta. I'm based in Delhi, and I joined Pratham in 2008 with the Delhi program. Over the years, I've been part of many different programs for children, starting right from age 3 to almost 14. And now I focus a lot on the early years. So across different states, I'm involved with programs that span across the early years. That's age 3 to age 8. Yeah, that's me.
Great. Thanks a lot, Samyukta. So, as you know, our topic for today is the national education policy, something that we have been talking a lot about at Pratham and, amongst our peers as well. So, can you give our audience a little bit of background on the national education policy and maybe highlight some of the key shifts, especially with respect to school education?
Sure. Devyani, as you mentioned, the last policy came out in 1986, which was then revised in 1992. And after 92, this is the first education policy that has come out. And this is year 2020. So that in itself, I think, is a cause for great excitement because it captures a lot of the things that we've been saying across the country, saying and seeing across the country. This policy is landmark in many different ways. And there are certain shifts that hopefully, in the time that we have, we will be able to touch upon. The policy is divided into 4 parts. It has something around early education, higher education, inclusion, how can we implement it effectively, etc. And it's a short 64-page document. It's been in the making for a long time, and it says a lot of interesting things and has been, debated a lot in the last few months since the policy came out. To begin with, I think I'd like to begin with an image that is actually in the policy document. So, Devyani, if you can pull up that image for me, I think it brings out, a big shift which everyone in India is talking about right now. So on your screen, you will be able to see an academic structure that begins in grade 1 and goes up to grade 12. So the one big shift that this policy talks about is not 12 years of education, but 15 years. And where do the additional 3 years come in? They come in the early years. So there are 2 big shifts. There's a shift from 10 plus 2. So you would go from grade 1 to 10 and then 11 and 12 in earlier on. But this policy says spend the first 5 years on building the foundational stages, the early years. Then spend some time in grades 3 to 5, which they call preparatory, 3 years in grades 6 to 8, and then grades 9 to 12 becomes 4 years. So 12 years to 15 years, and a big shift on the foundational learning piece, which is now 5 years. And then, of course, the policy says some very interesting things, which, things that can change the functioning, the teaching learning processes of education in this country. And I hope we can talk more about that, Devyani.
Thanks, Samyukta. That's very useful, and I think for everyone, who's invested in the education space, this has been a very big shift, and hopefully a mostly positive shift. But I'm sure there will be some challenges in as well. You mentioned earlier that you've been focusing a lot on the early years, and I know the policy talks about a continuum in the early years. So, what are your thoughts on this continuum, and how does it link to Pratham's work and Pratham's thoughts about this earlier segment?
Yes. This part, this is this part of the policy actually brings together what we call preschool education and what we called education in grades 1 and 2. And it says, look at it on a continuum. And that's the part that I think, really excites me, and I think excites many people within Pratham and outside. Traditionally, many of the people who are listening would know that community-based preschool centers or Anganwadis are the places where there was preschool education happening, along with other things like health, immunization, etc. Government schools in particular didn't really have a preschool before grade 1. And so quite often, children would enter grade 1 in public schools or government schools, as we call them in India. On the other hand, you have private schools which would have like 3 years or 4 years of preschool, where you'd be, you could go to nursery, then you go to kindergarten, and then you go to class 1. So one finds a variety of trajectories when it comes to the early years across India. And what this policy has done, it has formally brought in the early years into the school education setup. What that means is that, it's not like policies in the past did not talk about early childhood education, but by saying that, maximum brain development happens before the age of 6, and, we need to be paying a lot of attention to this. What it's saying is that look at education wherever it happens on a continuum. So whether it is about, where are children coming from and where are they going, whether it is those geographical spaces, children going from Anganwadis to schools, whether it is teaching learning or expectations, priorities, or outcomes at the end of 5 years, at the end of grade 2, what should children know? This policy is basically saying, see all of this on a continuum, because the child is the same. Everything else may change over time, but if you don't keep the child at the center and look at these 5 years seamlessly, then we may have a problem in later years. So this continuum piece is particularly close to my heart. And I think you asked me, where is Pratham placed when it comes to this continuum? And I think we are uniquely placed. As we know, when Pratham began 25 years back, we actually began with Balwadis, which are preschools that we set up in the community. Today, we are there in about 19 states, whether it is with the preschool program or grades 1 and 2. And I think this learning, not just inside school, but with communities and mothers of little children, I think all the learning that we have working in the earlier space is going to inform how this policy changes to practice.
Thanks, Samyukta. And I think that's very interesting to hear, and I think very exciting for organizations like Pratham that have really been, trying to talk about the importance of the early years and what needs to be done, and many of our partner organizations working across the country. I'm seeing that we have audience joining from different parts of the world. We have a lot of our friends from India, but we also have people from different parts of the US, and some interesting questions coming in as well, which we'll get to in a minute. But before we do that, Samyukta, the policy also talks, the policy and sort of the policy advice around it also talks about, focus on foundational skills, and linked to that is this national mission for literacy and numeracy, or foundational literacy and numeracy that is on the cards. So how do you think this is going to pan out, and what are areas where Pratham can play a role?
Yes, this policy actually calls out what Pratham has been saying for the longest time. It says that if you don't have foundational learning, which is basic literacy, being able to read, being able to write, and being able to do basic math in place, the rest of this policy actually becomes irrelevant. That's what's written in this policy, and I think the fact that it calls it out, the fact that it calls out what Pratham has been saying for so many years, is really landmark. When I joined in 2008, I remember Usha Tai, Rukmini, Madhav, everyone talking about reading, learning to read L to R, and then reading to learn. And I think yesterday the Prime Minister actually talked about learning to read and reading to learn in one of the speeches that he gave at an education conclave. So I think the fact that what we've been saying is now the cornerstone of this policy is huge. And what we can do here is that we've been doing this for the last 25 years. This know-how, how do we get children to read, not just in the early years, but also in from grades 3 to 5. How do we get children to catch up even if they can't read? Is something that I think whether it is teachers or government systems, we can share this learning with them. Devyani, you head international collaborations, and teaching at the right level is what you lead across the world. I think we need to, in India, with this mission, which they want to achieve by 2025, we need to put teaching at the right level right at the center to do this.
Absolutely, Samyukta, and I think that the fact that this policy now calls out early years, calls out foundational skills, is going to hopefully change a lot in the way the education system in India works. But just quickly, your thoughts before, there are some questions coming up, clarifications actually from the audience. But your thoughts on how you think this policy is going to impact the way education systems work in India?
So I'm very optimistic about the policy. I think just by having said what they have, I think there's reason to believe that things are going to change. The learning crisis that we've been highlighting, that our ASER survey has been highlighting every year, I'm hoping that changes. But I would be a little cautious here, Devyani. I think any policy gives us direction, but to actually see it in practice requires political will, which one can be hopeful about. That political will has to come with resources that can actually see what is on paper in practice. And I think ultimately it's the know-how. How do I actually achieve the mission that has been set out, which will decide if the landscape of education in this country changes. When it comes to the know-how, whether it is in the early years or when it comes to foundational literacy and numeracy, I think there Pratham has a very pivotal role to play. So if the will is there and the resources are available, I think Pratham and the governments of different states and the center can work together to see something completely different, not just in a few years, not just in a few decades, but in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we're all hoping to see some big changes and shifts very quickly. But Samyukta, before we wrap up our conversation today, there's some clarification questions coming in from the audience, which I wanted to take. One question was, so does this new structure mean that children are going to start school early? Is really this what the implication is for Indian children, and what is this early years education? Is it or preschool education? Is it based on the Montessori model, or is it something different? I'll let you take this.
Yeah, great. I think both the questions are great. One is, does it mean we get to school early? I don't think so. I think one can get to school early, but it's basically formalizing the fact that education begins before grade 1. Now, whether you're doing it in a private school or you're doing it in an Anganwadi, the fact that brain development happens so rapidly means that one has to look at education. And this is playful learning that they're talking about, the policy is talking about. And that begins early. And the quality of that education has great implications for what children do later. Do we stick to the Montessori model? I think the policy has not really talked about the Montessori model. It has talked about play-based learning and different domains that need to be informed in this learning, but it hasn't prescribed a specific model. And I think that's easy to that's easy to understand, because in a country as diverse as India, with the sort of the wide variety of provisioning that we have in the early years, it's difficult to say that you have to do Montessori, or you have to do Reggio or any other sort of model. So yeah, it's not prescriptive in that sense. I hope that answers the question, Devyani. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, there's a lot more that the policy talks about in terms of foundations and early years. We'll save some of those questions for when we talk to Rukmini. But thank you very much for talking to us today. I'm going to bring in our next guest now, but I think before we bring Annette in, I just want to say that as you are seeing, this policy is talking about quite a few reforms and a lot of the right noises in education. And there isn't really a one size fits all, especially in a country as diverse as India, as Samyukta said. So we're going to see a lot of different ways to address some of the issues in the policy, some of the focus areas as we move forward. So let's move now to our next guest for today, Annette. As I said, Annette works with our vocational training team and is going to talk to us a little bit about what this policy says around vocational skills, especially even for the younger children. So welcome, Annette. Just as with Samyukta, maybe you want to do a quick introduction to the audience and tell them what you do at Pratham.
Sure. Thank you so much, Devyani. I'm really happy to be here. So I work primarily on our data and technology projects in Pratham Institute. Over the past few years, we've started experimenting and now heavily leaning into digital skilling. So that's one of the pieces I work on, and just broadly looking at monitoring and evaluation pieces within Pratham Institute.
Fantastic. So I know, Annette, this policy has been a big area of discussion within Pratham Institute. I think there's a lot of talk about vocational skills in the policy. So obviously, I think many things for you all to be thinking about. But maybe let's just talk to the audience about, what does the policy say on vocational skills, and what do you think it means for young people in India?
Thank you so much, Devyani. So I think, first off, I think a lot of us at in a vocational training institution were very excited to know that there is a chapter on vocational education within the NEP, because this was probably the first time that we actually had a core focus on vocational education within an education policy. If I have to just spell it out, within the policy, there is a very clear goal that has been identified, and that's probably the most exciting thing for us. The policy has set a target that by 2025, over 50% of learners in the school and higher education system are going to have exposure to vocational education. Now, that's a huge goal. It's a very ambitious goal, if I may say so, because at this point of time, less than 5% of India is a part of the skilled workforce. And I think credit to the policy that we've actually managed to highlight the gaps in vocational education system that has existed so far. So the policy, the first half of the chapter on vocational education has just purely identified the problem. So it's very clearly acknowledged the fact that vocational education has been typically packaged as a program meant for those who have dropped out of the school system. It's been something that's kept in place to take care of slippage. Vocational education is typically something which we only talk about at grades 11 to 12. Someone completes the vocational education system, it's very difficult for them to integrate or reintegrate back into the mainstream or higher education system that we have in India. The policy has also very clearly called out the fact that dignity of labor has been a problem typically in India. So I think that's where the first really interesting part comes for us, is knowing that we are acknowledging the gaps which have existed in the vocational education system. And the second half of the vocational education chapter, if you look at it, actually talks about proposed solutions. And at the crux of it, the main solution proposed is how do we integrate vocational education into the school system and into the higher education system. And I think both of these are very exciting opportunities for anyone in the vocational skilling space, as well as for those in the education space. And I think for both youth and children in India, this could mean a shift in the way we look at learning, in the way we look at aspirations in general. So, yeah, I think I'll just start off with that and we can look at it a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, and I think at Pratham we've been trying various different things with vocational training, right? We've had our industry-specific vocational training programs. We've also been experimenting with, awareness building, exposure to vocational skills, recognition of prior learning. Sort of all of these different pieces do tie in different ways to what the policy is saying. So maybe you want to tell us about some of the linkages in what the policy is suggesting and our experiences in India so far.
Sure. So I think I'll start with the first one, which is the recommendation of integrating vocational education into the school system. We've done a few projects related to this in the past few years where we have tried to work primarily with youth in the 14 to 18 age group. You'll know the Asar Beyond Basic Survey was something that rolled out in 2017. And since then, we've actually tried to conduct a few campaigns where we talk to youth about different opportunities which exist, connecting them to role models, trying to create awareness. And while these have been slightly more localized efforts, I think what's interesting for us is knowing that now India is thinking about this at scale. So there, with this policy, I think we have a larger opportunity to work more extensively with younger age groups and think about how can we package vocational education for these younger age groups. The policy also talks about the importance of integrating vocational education into the higher education system. So if you look at the fine print, they have recommended setting up a committee that focuses exclusively on this aspect. And they have asked higher education institutions to collaborate actively with both nonprofits as well as other organizations in the skilling space in order to gain their expertise. And I think with Pratham's many years of experience in the vocational skilling space, this could be a very exciting opportunity for us to work actively with higher education institutions. And lastly, I'll mention the recognition of prior learning, which is also something that the policy talks about. That's upward mobility or upskilling existing workers is something which we have started in the past few years. And I think what's exciting is that the policy has recognized this as a very clear way or a very clear solution for integrating those workers who might have not completed the education system and sort of work with them. So at the crux of it, what we're seeing is this shift in mindset from looking at the entire system of vocational education as something that is meant for people who have dropped out to looking at maybe recognition of prior learning as something that is meant for those who have dropped out of the schooling system, while looking at vocational education as something that is open and aspirational for everyone. And I think there are a lot of different projects happening in Pratham right now, which could possibly link back to this entire space. So, yeah.
Thanks, Annette. And I think, again, very, very, I'd say, positive shifts in what the policy is saying about vocational scaling, about integration into school education. And as a young person in India yourself, what do you think this means for the youth in India? What is this going to look like in the next few years? What possibilities could it create?
So I think I want to answer this question with something which we've learned over the many years that we've worked with youth in India. So if you ask any adult how to introduce, like if you ask someone to introduce themselves, we typically talk about what work we do. We try to talk about our sector or our designation or the company. What you do is something that gives you pride. It's something that gives you motivation, and it's also your way of your identity. I think in India, typically what we have seen is that we see young kids are they aspire to become doctors, they aspire to become engineers. There are a lot of people who aspire to work for the government service jobs and so on, but you don't see a lot of aspiration within vocational skilling specifically. I think what could be a nice shift is for young people to aspire for those roles which are actually employing the majority of India. 81% of India works in the informal sector, 30% is in casual labor, about 50% is self-employed. And I think looking at those jobs which are actually hiring us as aspirational, and for young people to start being proud of the kind of work that they're doing is something that could be a very positive outcome out of this policy. Of course, this is a very long, I think a very ambitious outcome which we're looking at. This is not something which might happen immediately, but I think it's great to start to have those first steps towards this goal. So I think that's probably for me what's most exciting about this policy for young people in particular.
Thanks, Annette. And I think everyone's going to be very excited to see what happens in the next few months, in the next few years. So maybe now let's take a few comments or questions from the audience. I think there are some comments around, integration of vocational in school and how this is a very good idea. But maybe let's look at this question that we have on the screen. Given that Pratham focuses on digital skilling, how important is the emphasis on foundational numeracy in the NEP to build a skill set needed for the digital workforce? And what are the upskilling objectives? So maybe you want to take all of that question.
Yes. So I mean, when we talk about digital skilling in India, in India right now, about 24% of households actually have access to a smartphone. So the way we look at digital skilling in India has to be manifold. So the first tier is just giving people exposure to skills through digital means. So I think that's the first level that Pratham started working in, where we're trying to introduce young people in India to the idea that you can pick up hard skills through a digital platform. I think the second level is where you are actually looking at jobs which require digital skills or trying to work on aspects such as skill sets which are based on the digital platform. I think it's great that the NEP has set a good focus on technology and on the idea that technology is also something that needs to be integrated into the system. So we're going to see a lot of initiatives around digital skilling. I don't know if I can comment effectively enough to say that digital skilling is going to be that the second aspect of digital skilling is going to be the way forward. I think we have to complete the different levels before we actually get to the final stage. But I think definitely at this point of time, upskilling with digital skills is something which we need to work on. Of course, access to digital resources is a much larger question which we need to figure out. And that's going to very proportionately affect the rate at which digital skilling is going to improve in India. So I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Annette. And I think lots of questions lots of comments around, this change and welcoming the idea of vocational education in schools. And I think we could continue this conversation for quite some time, but maybe let's get Samyukta back on and wrap up this section of our conversation. But thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today and for discussing some of our thoughts. And as I said, I think this is a conversation that can definitely continue for much longer. But maybe for now, I'll say thank you very much, and maybe move to our next segment in the show today, which is our conversation with our CEO, Dr. Rukmini Banerji. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to all of you who are watching us and who are sharing this video. And if any of you would like to support our work today, you can do so by going to prathamusa.org/give. So that's prathamusa.org/give. This will help you support some of the ways we are trying to reach out to children and youth across India in these interesting times. For now. And just to stay updated on our work, do follow Pratham India and Pratham USA on social media, and you'll get to learn a lot more about Pratham's work and impact, including some of the interesting things that are happening on the ground right now to make sure that we continue to reach children and youth, even in times of school closures during the pandemic. So thank you very much once again. I would now like to welcome our final guest for today, Dr. Rukmini Banerji, who is the CEO of Pratham. Hi, Rukmini, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Lovely to be here.
Thanks, Rukmini. And I know it's very late here in India, but I'm sure your energy will keep everyone awake for quite some time as well. So very quickly, Rukmini, I think let's jump right in. So obviously we've talked quite a bit about some of the key aspects of the NEP, but in your view, what are some of the highlights of the NEP? For you personally?
So it's very difficult to distinguish between me personally and what we in Pratham think should be done. And so I think I'm just voicing or maybe repeating what both Annette and Samyukta and Devyani, you yourself have said. I think the most exciting part of the new education policy is this real focus on building foundations well and early. This is something that I think in Pratham we've been working on right perhaps from the beginning. And the day the last year when the draft policy was submitted to the government, it was a lot fatter. It was around 500 pages, and I think it was a Sunday. And I kept thinking that I don't really want to read the document because, what if the document says something else? And then as I began to read, I had to kind of pinch myself a little bit to make sure that what I was reading was actually, really in the policy. And I think that many of the key things that we've been working on in Pratham for the last 10 years, 15 years, are there in, not only there, but if you skim through the policy, all the big, bold boxes, especially in the primary school years, I think resonate very well with us. So start early, build well, have a timeline, get all the basic work done by grade 3 so that children can really benefit from the potential of schooling as you go on. And as Annette stressed, how do you bring in skill? I actually don't like the word vocational skilling because I think skilling and schooling can go very well together. And how do you bring that in right from, maybe primary or even from middle school grades so that you come out schooled and skilled. And that helps you to deal with whatever the world holds beyond.
Thanks, Rukmini. And is this different, similar to the previous policy or the revision? Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, the previous policy was quite a long time ago, even for me. So I would think that there are, I think, quite a few major changes, but I think the biggest change that I see is this restructuring of the younger age group. This 5 years, that the first step in education begins at age 3. The second thing is that you see this whole age 3 to age 8 as a continuum and not as something that happens in a preschool space and then something else that happens in the primary school space. And the third thing, of course, is that use this time, the first 5 years, to really build your basic foundational skills, which have numeracy and literacy, but have a lot of other skills in them. And so I think that this very solid grounding, somewhere in the policy, it even goes on to say that if you don't achieve the goals of the first 5 years, then the rest of the policy is irrelevant. And I think that's absolutely the case, that you cannot build a big high building when you're, and I think we've all known this, but seeing it in black and white and in big bold letters. And I think that it's only been a month and 10 days since it was launched, but all the pronouncements from the government are also, along these lines. So we hope that this means that, we all, not just the government, but everybody can focus on getting these things done. The other thing is, I think, while there's been a lot of discussion on where's the money and how will we implement, our own experience in Pratham in working in this age group, both as some of you may know, in India, the early years prior to grade 1 are actually in the responsibility of a different department. It's the Department of Women and Child Welfare. And I think that this integration across two different ministries, if you will, can be difficult. On the other hand, coming from the view that this is child development, I think brings a very holistic and all-round view to how children must grow. And it's not just what you do academically and in school. So, the world over, early childhood development has a lot of other skills. How do you get along with other people? How do you collaborate? How do you, the social skills, I think, are as important. And so I think that bringing this continuum will hopefully bring a lot of these values also into our early grades in the primary school. There's a lot of hard work to be done, But having worked in this space, I think it's very doable. We've worked with 3 state governments on very large scale, Himachal, Punjab, and Delhi. We feel that these are easy. I mean, I won't say easy, but I think this is low-hanging fruit, low-hanging, tasty, and delicious fruit that we must pick and taste and enjoy. The other thing I wanted to say, Devyani, who knows if you'll give me this question or not, so I'm just holding the space so that I can get out what I want to say. We looked at our own data from the last 15 years that our big ASER survey shows. And I think we are also poised at a very good time. If you look at the education level of mothers of young children in India, 15 years ago, it was quite a different story. We had a very large proportion of mothers whose children were in primary school who had not been to school themselves. But in the last 10 years, almost everybody who enters school in grade 1 definitely reaches up to grade 8 and often beyond. So we are working not just with this continuum idea, but behind it is a pool of schooled moms. And a lot of the Pratham work, as you may know, has a school or a center component and a family component. And we feel families are stronger than ever before to participate as equal partners in getting this foundation done.
Yeah, and I think this finds mention in the policy as well in spaces, which I think is a very positive sign as well. How do we bring the community in? How do we create this connection between the school and the parents? Another interesting piece, I think, Rukmini, the policy talks about is sort of experiential learning, or beyond rote learning, or moving away from rote learning. And what do you think this means in a system like India? How do you think that teachers will adapt to this potentially new way of learning for many children and systems, which is moving away from rote learning and thinking more about critical thinking, focusing on the way we are learning, etc.?
It's a coincidence perhaps that the new education policy was released at this time when we are right in the middle of our COVID crisis. Because the crisis, of course, has done huge amount of disruption with every kind of thing that we are involved in, whether it's the livelihoods, whether it's education, whether it's health. But I think in the sphere of schooling, particularly of primary schooling, several things have happened in the last few months that I think only support the direction in which we need to go, the direction that the new education policy kind of outlines. So I think across the board, whether you're an educated, well-resourced parent sitting in South Bombay or South Delhi, or a much less resourced, parent, maybe much less educated as well in a village, I think the system, both at the macro level and the school level, recognizes that parents have been the real force in pulling us through this period. So I think that recognition that parents can be support, recognition that what happens outside the school could be a very valuable piece in this whole picture has been demonstrated to everyone. And I think a third thing that has happened during COVID is this concern for the last child. I mean, obviously, we should all be concerned about children who are getting left out, but somehow this crisis has brought this, we've had, and I'm sure you've had with a lot of governments that you deal with, this concern that, we are not able to reach and we need to, and there are children getting left out. And so how do we do that? And all of this, I think, puts the school at the center of obviously schooling and of education. But I think recognizes that the windows and doors are wide open. The school boundaries, are there, but without the help of a lot of other people, we will not be able to go forward. I think this is really good news for really supporting the new education policy.
Thanks, Rukmini. And I have several more questions for you, but maybe we'll take some comments and questions from the audience and then come back to some of our points. So maybe let's see. First question right up there. Does the NEP 2020 address teaching at the right level? And if yes, how will it be implemented?
I should think that this teaching at the right level is really one of the ways in which foundational learning can be delivered or can be acquired by children. And the teaching at the right level, the biggest form of it is really as a catch-up program. For whatever reason, if children did not get these skills in time, they're only 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. So there's no reason why catch up cannot be done. So I would like to think that if you look at the national education policy, there is a big piece which our early childhood work is directly involved, which says how do you build the foundations well. We like to think of it as a leap forward. And then a second big piece, which says if you didn't, for whatever reason, get these in time, then there is a possibility of a big catch up. So I think that with our past experience with teaching at the right level, we should be in a good position to convince governments that this catch up can be done very swiftly, can be done quite frugally. And again, I'll bring COVID in. I think with schools having been closed for 6 months or more, that catch up is absolutely required. I mean, even if there hadn't been a new education policy, I think the governments would have taken the view that we need to rebuild and need to bring kids back to where they were. So, we already work with quite a few state governments. There are governments with whom we may not have worked in the last year or two, but who have some experience of this. And we are already beginning to talk to, a whole slew of governments to say, let's get ready to do this when the schools open. But let's not wait, because there's a lot of people around the country who are already working with kids in hamlets, in neighborhoods, young people. And therefore, what can we do to start with smaller activities almost right away?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this focus on catch up is not going to be important just in India, of course, globally. What can be done to make sure as schools are closed, children get to catch up, and as soon as schools open, effective measures are put in place. So maybe let's take one more question from the audience. The question is, does Pratham's role, strategy, or efficacy chance in any way change in any way, not that now that the education policy is more aligned with Pratham's mission? So Rukmini, over to you.
I think that as I explained, I think the continuum of the early years, we have, luckily, I think we had invested quite a bit in the last some years in understanding how to work on large scale. We have a big catch up in teaching at the right level experience, but I think we've built up a wide experience on the early years. And also the last, I would say, 7-8 years of working in the vocational skilling space, working with school dropouts and adolescents. These are all things that I think will be extremely useful as we offer, what we can do in helping to take forward the policy into practice.
Yeah. So I think, in my view, at least, I think we keep doing what we have been doing for many years and staying focused on that area, because it is aligning quite well with what the policy is saying. Maybe just one more question for you. You mentioned the vocational training. So what are some of your thoughts on this idea of integration of vocational skills into school education? There's, as I said, many different ways in which the policy is talking about this. So what do you think about that, and how do you think this is going to pan out?
I think it's a huge new opportunity, and obviously we need to think in detail about how we take this forward. But just the last week or so, I've been having conversations with Annette and other colleagues in our Pratham skilling space. And again, I feel that the opportunity right now with schools which will reopen, hopefully in the near future, there is a great deal that needs to be done to make the schools ready for the children to come in. And so I really don't see why kids who are in grades 6, 7, 8 should not have the skill about how you maintain just, the simple facilities that you have in the school. Our skilling team has been doing these webinars, and I've been attending some of them. And one was on basic plumbing. And I had to, the minute the webinar finished, go into my own bathroom and start changing the washers, because it's just like we don't know what to do. But if this is explained, I think it's another way in which to link what the community can do, what the kids can do to make the school a stronger place. So I think this is a very good opportunity to bring these first-hand experiences, apply them in your immediate context, whether it is in school or outside. I think the pride that kids have that they created something, they fixed something, is immense. So I don't think, in fact, I feel that it should be looked at as hands-on learning, which is as important as the thing that you do with your mind and with your, with your academic part of it, and not really make this divide between vocational skilling and otherwise. These are skills that any kid who reaches 14 and 15 should be able to do, just like you should be able to read and apply what you know. Similarly, you should be able to use your hands to fix common problems or understand common connections. So I think big opportunity both inside the school, frankly, and also outside for this age group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Rukmini, with the outreach we've been doing to kids in communities, we're already seeing that children are very excited by this idea of hands-on learning and are really, really, being able to utilize whatever resources are available around them and the people around them to make some of this happen. So I think we already know that this is something that will work with children. So, Rukmini, maybe before we go back to the audience, just your thoughts on how do you see this policy really being implemented in India? And I know that there are some questions coming in on timeline and standards and so on. And what do you think will ensure a successful implementation of the policy recommendations?
There's always a grand plan and an ideal way in which to work. But we know, and I feel like, sometimes somebody told me the other day, you talk like a housewife. And I wasn't sure if that was a gendered comment or not. But what I mean is that we have been in Pratham used to, for the last, right from the beginning, in working very iteratively. Start with what you have, get going. At some level, there is resources, and at some level, there's never enough resources. But one thing we don't lack is the energy of people. And I think that, this question has come up, that where is the additional funds to bring these early years into the primary school space? And I said, we already have a very large preschool network through the government early childhood, what is it called? Integrated ICDS, Integrated Child Development Scheme. It's the biggest one in the world. We are not starting from zero. It may not be the most perfect thing, but that's where you start from. Do what you can, set reasonable goals, and move ahead. We feel that we've done a lot of that in Pratham. The success that we've achieved is because of this approach, very practical, frugal approach. We are used to doing it at home. When, I remember in my own family, when by the end of the month, we stopped eating, many things, and we're eating a lot of rice and dal. And so by the beginning of the month, when the money came in again, you eat some more. So I think that you need to be flexible, you need to be frugal, and you need to realize that there is a lot of capability around if we are all united for the common goal. And I think over and over again in Pratham, we've seen this. So how do we infect people around us with this can do, will do, I'm about to do it right now mentality? I think that will fuel this going forward. I've always felt that I've been in Pratham for 25 years. And I think the thing that is most exciting, about Pratham, but I think about this whole situation in general, is that if the young people are not excited about how they can contribute to the future of wherever they are at. Look at yourself, look at Samyukta, look at Annette. Where does my energy come from? It comes from the energy of all of you, because you see this forward movement as being a very positive movement. So I think it's really, really important for young people to have a good opportunity to feel that they can contribute, that they can do something, because that builds the confidence for doing even more. And I really hope that this opening up of the kind of the school walls, in some sense, will give this opportunity to millions of young people to say, I matter, I belong, and I'm going to help, because that's what's going to take us ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Rukmini. And I think Lots of food for thought there, and hopefully inspiration for people who are thinking about how they can contribute. And I also truly believe that I think if you really want to make a difference, you can contribute. And I think, and this is something that I learned at Pratham, you inherently believe that every teacher wants children to succeed. So every education system wants children and youth to succeed. And I'm sure we can make it happen if we keep that attitude up. So maybe let's go back again to some audience questions. I think lots of different types of questions coming in. Here's the first one. What are your takeaways with regards to language and language education stated in the policy document? I'll let
No,
you
I'm
interpret
glad.
that.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad there was an earlier question as well on language. So the language issue, I think, is not a new one. In a multi-splendored language country like India, this has always been a very emotive issue. But I think the difference really is the combination of the language question tied to the early foundations of children. And in many ways, that kind of simplifies, at least for primary school years, what is the right direction. So, as you can imagine, ever since the policy was announced, every TV channel has actually picked up this one topic as often the highlight of what needs to be discussed. And what we are saying is that it's not a question of Hindi or English or Tamil or whatever, any other language. It's really, if you want to build these young children's foundation well, you have to speak at their language. So if we are doing teaching at the right level, you have to have language at the right level as well. And the language at the right level, and I'm now using this term, I don't say mother tongue or, whatever, regional language. I think it has to be in the playground language of the child, the most comfortable, whatever language the child is most comfortable in. How does he fight with his brothers and sisters? How does he have friends? The language of friendship in the playground. That's the language that every early grade teacher needs to know. Now, interestingly, in India, in the preschool system that the government runs, the distance between the home and the school is actually very short. The mother and the Anganwadi teacher are often very, very similar. Same neighborhood, same kind of a background, and therefore the distance is not there. And that goes for culture, for language, for everything. When we go to school, somehow the distance from the home to the school increases. The teacher is so-called more qualified, which she is professionally more qualified, but often because she may be coming from the nearest town or she's from a different strata, she doesn't speak the language of the child. And so I think that in addition to everything else, it's really important to say what is it that the children can relate to and start with that. And if that language in the Bombay slum, kids in the Bombay slums often speak 3 languages because that's their milieu in which they are growing up, in which case anybody who deals with them must be like that. And there's no lack of people like that. They may not have the right qualifications as far as educational degrees go. But I think the fundamental thing is that you have to be able to speak, you have to be able to communicate, you have to be able to connect. Once you have all of that, I think the foundation gets built well. So this is my view on language, that it's the language of the child.
Yeah, and I think, Rukmini, this is something that is so deeply entrenched in the way we work, right? With the way we approach working with children, irrespective of age, the way we think about creating resources that are accessible in the language that children understand, in the language that parents understand and communicate. So maybe we can take one more question from the audience now. So how does the policy plug issues in education that Asar has been highlighting over the years? I think that's a fantastic question. So Rukmini, over to you.
I think the very backbone that the policy is trying to create for the country is really what Asar has been trying to say. So this key foundational literacy and numeracy, essentially, I interpret it as, foundations mean many things, but a core part of it is that children must be able to read with understanding and confidence. I think a lot of people say that Pratham is focusing on literacy and numeracy. I think we really focus on building the confidence and the self-perception of the child in his or her own capability to be able to learn and to grow. when you have been in school for a number of years and you haven't gotten these obvious skills, you begin to doubt your own capabilities. You begin to feel that I cannot learn. And what what Asar points out is that this is a problem. What teaching at the right level does is in 30, 40, 50 days, this problem is gone. Okay. And a child can then feel that if I could have learned this, I can learn anything. So I would say that the policy is based directly on the kinds of things that Asar has been trying to, not trying to, that Asar has highlighted, not just in India, but it's been picked up elsewhere in the world. And that this building of the foundation is a affirmation in the possibility, the capability that every child can learn. And we need to do it. And there's even a timeline that by 2025, it's not just in my life, in Devyani's lifetime, it will happen. It has to happen in my lifetime. So I'm going to retire the minute it happens.
Thanks, Rukmini. I think there are lots of questions, but maybe we can take a couple more.
There's a question about recommendations for the US. I have no idea. I barely know enough about my country. I will not, although I lived for a lot of formative years in Chicago, I would not, at least on this forum, say, what should be done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that this is a question that we've been asked many times, and I guess something to think about. But maybe we can take another one, which is asking, maybe we can talk a little bit about, what we've learned in this COVID response phase, Rukmini, and how you think some of the learnings from this phase can continue over time, and what those would mean in terms of achieving some of the policy recommendations.
We've learned a lot of things, and I don't know in the time that you have left whether we can lay them out. But I certainly think that the investment that Pratham did with the support of Pratham USA, with the support of a lot of people in Pratham USA, in having digital content in many languages, in 10 or 11 languages, not just academic content, but what we say, learning for life, a lot of other other kinds of engaging activities, hands-on learning. The fact that we had that investment meant that as soon as this lockdown happened and we began to see that we need to do something from remote, we could just activate all of this. The second thing that we realized is that through most of our work, we have things we do inside the school or inside the preschool center, but a lot of things in groups, children's groups or mothers groups in the community. And in this time, I think the combination of being able to go from remote, but who do you go to? But we had already, prior to COVID, these groups of young people, groups of mothers, groups of children, into which we could plug. So I would say a very big learning has been just reinforcement to our own belief that parents and community really come up to bat when there is a problem. And therefore, why should they not be part of going ahead? I think reaching out from remote, there's no reason why we should stop it once schools open, because that's a direct connect to families, which we intend to keep up. And I think on our vocational skilling side, you will see that they have also completely pivoted. One of the problems that we had in India was that a lot of young people didn't know that there are options other than going to college and doing an academic degree. And what our skilling team has managed to do is to do these massive webinars, for the last couple of months, which enables lots and lots of rural youth to see that there are options available that you can think about. So I think there are many features of what we've been doing in the last few months that we will continue. The one feature that I hope will change quickly is that we can actually meet everybody again. Because I think it's an incredible, I wish I could show, or I don't know how one can demonstrate what our 7,000-8,000 people have been able to do and how teams have actually gotten closer. But I think everyone is just dying to, get out there and meet the kids, and just as you all are.
Yeah, and I think, Rukmini, it's been so incredible for all of us to witness what has been happening, and this race to capture some of it, both in terms of experiences, but also visually to see what's actually going on, and some amount of positivity in these times, I think, when people are really struggling with some of the challenges. So thank you. I think thank you for all of your comments. Very, very interesting for me as well. So I'm sure very interesting for the audience. And I think I've had a very interesting time talking to all of you today, and hopefully it's been an insightful discussion for everyone here. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you so much to our audience. I know that we have audience from different parts of the world. A big thank you to those of you who have joined us from India, where it's already getting very, very late. And we look forward to connecting with you again on our next Voices from the Ground episode. Till then, please remember you can follow us on social media. And if you'd like to support us, please go to prathamusa.org/give. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great weekend.